Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. We are back for the case 4. And this time, we're going to be addressing Josh Washington from Until Dawn. Yes, I know this is a very, very controversial topic. It is very controversial because a lot of people don't like Josh. A lot of people want to blame him for everything that happened on that mountain. But guys, I'm here to change your mind. And I'm actually going to make the case for Josh that he's actually the victim of everything that happened there and that we can justify his actions on that mountain. So when you think of Josh, you think of a villain, of a psychopath, of the mastermind of a night of terror, of a comedy of errors. That's the story, right? Just a vengeful prankster, pure and simple, and he just wanted to get revenge. But what if we're actually missing something, guys? What if we're actually missing something? What if the monster we think we see on the screen by the name of Josh, beneath the surface, could there be more than just a prankster? But could there be a tragic truth to it? There's a story there with Josh Washington of pain and of a young man that was pushed to the breaking point. Now, hear me out. I'm not one to excuse his actions, not at all. It was a bad thing what he did. Terrorizing his friends, absolutely not right. But was it understandable? Could his behavior be explained by something much deeper inside of him? Could we actually make the case for Josh not as a monster, but as a victim? So we're going to dive into the why behind Josh's action. We'll unpack the trauma. We'll unpack the trauma of losing his sister, a loss caused by his friends and partially by him. We'll explore how this specific grief destroyed him and broke his mind. And we're going to use in-game evidence. Everything will be fact-based. For example, like his psychiatric report to understand his state of mind. But it's not going to be just about psychology. What about the facts? The prank wasn't just Josh. It was also his best friends. It was a decision that they took as a group. And what was the cover-up? Everyone was on it. So, could Josh's twisted game and his comedy of errors, this night of terror, would actually be a desperate attempt to make them face their own guilt and face responsibility for their actions? To understand this, I want you to imagine something. So we humans have companions. We have dogs. Dogs are known as a man's best friend. Now imagine you've raised a dog since it was a puppy. He was part of your family, a brother or a sister or even a son or daughter. And one day, your best friends, the closest friends you have, decide to pull a joke on you or a reckless stunt. And in that process, that dog, your companion, a human's best friends, end up dying. That dog ends up dying because of your closest friends. You're devastated. You are betrayed. You are angry. You are sad. You feel the worst negative emotions a human could feel. And then you can't shake this anger out. You just can't say, I'm fine now. And you feel like the people you've trusted the most in your life, you feel like you've known them since they were little, they were your best friends. How could they do such an unimaginable thing to you? And how far will you be able to go as a human being to make them understand your pain? So in a sick, twisted way, That's exactly the position Josh finds himself in. He loses his sisters. People he loved more than anything. They're literally blood sisters, guys. Be, and that was called by a prank that went too far. And he can't let it go. So today, I will explore with you guys the psychological and emotional, and yes, I will justify his reasons behind Josh's elaborate revenge. His psychiatric report will allow us to dive deeper into his mind and into his growing paranoia. We will see how he ends up believing that scaring his so-called friends is the only way he will truly understand the horror he's lived through. So if you're ready to question everything, and if you're ready to question everything you thought about Josh, then stick around, because I promise this is going to be good. The case for Josh will be an unimaginable one. And by the end of this video, I promise you're going to see things from a different perspective, and specifically from his perspective. So let's start with my favorite topic, and probably the most important one. It's the psychological analysis of Josh. So in psychology, there's something we call acting out. And in the simplest of terms, acting out is when someone expresses some unconscious feelings or conflicts through his actions, not through his words, but through his direct actions. So instead of trying to talk them out of doing something, they act on those emotions. This is where the term acting out comes from. So think of it like a pressure valve you have. And sometimes the emotional buildup on that pressure valve is so big that the person literally acts out their pain and anger out of fear, because talking about it is simply impossible. And as a bit of background, the term acting out is actually a psychoanalytic theory who was made by who and originated by who? You already know. Good old Sigmund Freud. In therapy, it is observed that when a patient who can't process his emotions or process his feelings, they might resort to impulsive behavior, a bit like a child. We call them outbursts, dangerous stunts, or some people like to justify it by calling them pranks that force others to experience what they felt. So I'm going to use a quick analogy to make you understand. Imagine a teenager. He's furious at his parents, and he keeps getting criticism from there. So instead of sitting down and asking, hey, their words hurt me, let me talk to them about it, they sneak out at night, they party recklessly or break curfew on purpose. So they act out their emotions using action instead of communicating this anger to their parents. They cannot verbalize what they feel. So now you might ask, how does this concept apply to Josh? Because this was a good introduction, but I want to know how it applies to Josh. So picture a world that after this catastrophic prank, he loses Hannah and Beth, his sisters, his family, because of a joke that was taken way too far. He's drowning in grief, betrayal, and rage towards his friends and himself. He holds himself and them responsible for those cruel actions. So instead of reaching out for help or finding a healthy alternative, he cannot channel his pain. Josh decides to then funnel all this inner turmoil that he feels inside of him into one planned, massive night of terror. It wasn't just a small prank like, oh, there's a door, I'm going to put a bucket of water and they're all going to fall. The water's going to fall on them and ha ha ha, it is so funny. No. This is a planned night, a really drawn out plan of how he was going to terrorize them. So, I want you to think of Josh's trauma like a broken leg. It hurts. It is debilitating. You cannot walk. And what does a broken leg need at the moment? It needs compassion, help, healing, and support. So now imagine the person caused that leg break on this person accidentally or not accidentally decides to stand over you, brushing it off, or worse, acting like it never happened. So you know, guys, like in basketball, let's say you dunk on someone, you make your opponent fall. The disrespectful move is to walk over them, right? So imagine your best friend does this while they broke your leg. That's Josh. That's exactly Josh's scenario. His friends, through their prank, broke him. His psyche is broken. He lost his sister, guys. So instead of remorse and accountability, there is no justice. They just dipped. They ran away. They scattered. Years later, they decide, we're just going to return. We're going to return to the place where we robbed the bank. We're going to return to the chalet where Hannah and Beth died. And seemingly, they're all untouched by it. None of them seem to care or care enough. His pain has been dismissed. His loss is trivialized. And his friends have escaped with any real consequences. Sucks to say, but it's the truth. So this is where the acting out is crucial. In psychoanalysis, Josh is offloading his inner chaos into the real world. And what is his inner chaos? His guilt, his sorrow, and his anger. By forcing his friends to finally taste the terror he's endured and he's felt for all those years. Ever since Hannah and Beth died and disappeared. He's staging it all, guys. Traps, psychological twist, scaredness, and it's a full-on nightmare, which is mirroring the horror that he cannot escape inside. And this isn't just a simple revenge, guys. It is not. No. This is where everyone gets it wrong. It's not a revenge. It's a cry, and a desperate one, for justice. It is also a manifestation of a disorganized attachment. It is a conflicted behavior. It's an emotional dysregulation. And it's a way of coping with the horrifying pain that he feels inside of him. So in essence, Josh wants to make them feel the same anguish that he felt. To finally make them confront with the reality that they've seemingly decided to ignore. So he's reenacting his trauma in a broken, twisted way. Okay, we can all agree that it's broken and twisted, hoping to force the remorse out of his friends. Finally, just feel bad for what you did. Or at least draw out some accountability. He believes that no one has taken the blame. We can agree that there was no justice in this. And in his fractured mind, this terrifying game is his method of making them feel finally this burden they should have felt this whole time, because he wasn't the only one who was part of this prank, and it is his sisters. They were also part of this, and they need to take part of it and to finally acknowledge their role in the destruction of Josh's world. So you might ask yourself, well, I understand everything you're telling me now. I understand the psychological aspect of it. But how can you make this justifiable? This is what it is all about. Well, from you got to put yourself into Josh's shoes, and you got to put himself into his perspective. This is not random cruelty, guys. It is a direct response to a tragedy that he is convinced went unaddressed. Maybe they feel bad for what they did, but he doesn't know about it, and no one knows about it, and they don't show it. So no one owed up to the harm. No one took the blame, or at least recognized, guys, how serious it all was that his sisters died. So by scaring them senselessly, really, Josh is forcing them. Josh is, in a twisted way, Josh is forcing them to deal with their part in this fate for his sisters. He thinks this is the closest thing he can get to justice. And for some people, they will agree with this. I don't agree with vengeance, but the human spirit is flawed. We are sinful creatures, and sometimes grief is just too much. And we need a way for justice. This is the same way how when killers do not have justice. There's no justice for the killing of innocent people. So people feel like they have to do the job of the justice system for them. So it's really about grasping, guys, the source of his actions, understanding that Josh, his monstrous behavior, it was monstrous, stands from a psychological injury that is really deep into his core. It's a betrayal of trust by those who are supposed to be his best friend, who should be his support system. He's not just the villain you see in movies or in cartoons or in video games. It's a deeply wounded individual, guys. And he's acting out from a disorganized attachment, trying to process in his own way a devastating trauma, magnifying by the people who were supposed to be his best friends, who should have helped him heal at the same time. So in his twisted mind, the mind took him to a twisted reality that this is the only way to be heard. And that, guys, through the lens of acting out is where Josh's horrifying prank transforms from a simple villainy into a desperate cry for resolutions. Yes, it's traumatic and destructive, but in Josh's mind, it's the only way. It's the only way to finally purge this agony and this sorrow that he has inside of him. And that's by making his friends pay. He needs a scapegoat. He needs one. He needs someone to take the blame. And it doesn't make it right, guys, but it does explain and justify how he reached this point and why, to him, it seemed like it was the only path left. So, now we have to talk about his trauma-induced psychosis, or the more modern term called schizophrenia-like symptoms. And we have to see how this shaped Josh's actions. So, as a simple introduction, psychosis, it's really a state where someone just loses contact with reality. They might see or hear things that are not true. We often call them hallucinations, or firmly believe that things that they see simply aren't true. Delusions. So schizophrenia is a chronic, guys, it's forever. It's a chronic mental disorder marked by these symptoms: paranoia, delusions, visual hallucinations, and there's organized thinking. However, in human psychiatry, there is a link between extreme trauma and psychotic episodes. When a person is already emotionally vulnerable, in this case, Josh, a severe shock to their core can push them to the breaking point. I think we can all agree on that. So to make sense of this, think of a faulty electrical system. We have this electrical system in a house, and its wiring is already damaged, and it might hold together day to day. It might still work. We might still see some electricity flow there until there's a powerful surge. Let's say you have a mixer going, you have your laptop running, a computer, a generator, everything, and it makes, and it's a big trauma on the electrical system, and that there's a powerful surge. This extra stress finally overwhelms the system. So it blows a fuse, causing everything in that electrical board to short circuit. So in the same way, an individual who's already broken, who's already predisposed to mental health issues, can only endure so much pressure, so much grief, so much loss, and so much guilt before their mind short circuits, which leads directly to the psychosis. Josh fits this pattern exactly to the T. And I will prove this to you guys. I will prove this. In the game, he's been on various psychiatric medication for years, before, during, and after the incident. He's been cycling through a multitude of drugs, going from SSRIs, SNRIs, TCAs, and on the worst and most intense ones, MAOIs. So you might answer, what are these medical terms, these drug terms? I don't understand nothing of them. I will read to you the medical report. I will show it on screen, and I will go through the drugs, and I will tell you what type of drugs they are, what they do, and how they directly influence his mind, because this is pure scriptural facts which explains Josh's actions. The first one was on something called fluoxetine, which is a type of SSRI. And what is SSRI? It's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Complicated words. But what does it do? It increases the amount of serotonin in the brain. What is serotonin? Simply, serotonin helps regulate the mood. It helps to regulate your mood. So these medications are commonly used to treat depression and anxiety disorder. So why was it given to Josh? Why is it important for Josh? So fluoxetine is usually a first-time treatment for major depressive disorder. This is what's commonly used nowadays. And fluoxetine can help stabilize the mood of the person so they don't short circuit. And it can also reduce the depressive symptoms someone can have. However, with every medication, there's always a side effect to it. And what are the potential issues that could have happened to Josh? Josh, we know from the facts of the game, complain about the side effects of it, like headaches and nausea. So if Josh stopped taking those medications too quickly, it could experience something we call discontinuation symptoms. Mood swings, anxiety, or full-blown hallucinations that are less common with SSRIs, but they could still happen. So knowing this, he decided to go to the next thing. He was prescribed called something duloxetine. This is a type of SNRI. This is where we go to level 2 of psychiatric drugs. This is a serotonin. This is where I need to actually read it. Serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. And what does it do? I'll explain to you simply because that's the way I learned it as well. SNRIs will boost the serotonin. This is where we're on to the next level. But it also boosts norepinephrine levels to the brains. To the brain, not the, we don't have multiple brains. To the brain. So what does norepinephrine does to the brain or to the person? It helps controls the alertness and the energy of this person. So SNRIs can specifically help if someone is depressed in a depressive state. And it also accompanied by less motivation or fatigue. So if this person is depressed and they cannot do anything, they're in a cycle, guys. So fluoxetine was no longer effective and it had many side effects. The doctors in the psychiatric report we see tried the next level, duloxetine, for broader symptom relief. So then you ask yourself, well, what does the next level of psychiatric drugs could have cost to Josh? Well, Josh reported that he stopped taking those drugs. So by stopping taking those drugs, since this is a more intense psychiatric drug, the withdrawal and the discontinuation symptoms are true psychotic hallucinations that are uncommon but are still very probable with this level 2 of psychiatric drugs. Now, guys, we get to the big stuff. Guys, pardon my English, amitriptyline, which is a type of TSA. Now we're into the big boys, the TSAs, a tricyclic antidepressant. I'm not going to bore you too much, guys, with this. But the TSAs affect now directly the neurotransmitters in your brain. Primarily serotonin and our big guy, norepinephrine, but in a less selective way, guys. They also block the receptors inside your brain, which is why they often have bigger side effects like sedation, dizziness, and they are way more pronounced. So since the past two levels did not function or lose effectiveness, and he stopped taking them, they went to the next level. So this is where it takes your mind, guys. When older medications don't work, we have to go to the next levels. And TSAs have a high risk of severe side effects and are easier to overdose on. So, and rapidly stopping or overdosing on them can lead to, hear me out, confusion, agitation, and in rare cases, but less rare now, hallucination, especially when you combine it with extreme stress. And now we go to the last level of psychiatric drugs. Guys, this is the last line of defense. And this is when shit hits the fan. It's called phenelazine. And this is a type of MAOI. It's called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Very boring. But what it does is it increases the level of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And it prevents their breakdown. They are typically used, guys, typically from my research, when all the other antidepressants fail, or when someone is resistant to all the other antidepressant drugs, they are given this because it has a more broad effect. So why was it given to Josh? Because it's a last resort medication. Last resort medication, guys. Simple. After SSRIs, SNRIs, TCAs fail, they probably believe that this was the last thing we could do for Josh. And you can see that Josh's care is now well handled, even though it's in the hand of doctors. So you can imagine that it comes with big potential issues. So if someone decides to not take those drugs anymore or mess up the dosing, You want to know what it can do to a person? Psychotic episodes, paranoia, or severe withdrawal symptoms. So now, guys, how did Josh's medications lead to the hallucination? Well, we know there was an underlying vulnerability to Josh. Josh had already severe depression, as we've seen, and was treated for it, and possibly other undiagnosed issues like psychotic symptoms that could have been caused by those drugs. So when these treatments failed because he was more than just depressed, doctors kept on going with the next level of medication, and we can see that there was improper management. And we can miss it, but it's very important to note that in the psychiatric notes, Josh had trouble with side effects, and it was possibly self-medicated himself, like a lot of us do when we take drugs. A lot of us do that. It's not out of the ordinary for Josh to do this, or they decide to just change their dose. And with drugs like phenelazine, those abrupt changes, they will cause hallucinations, paranoia, and other symptoms. And where do we see hallucinations and paranoia? Guys, do you remember when Josh was in the cave saying, "No, no, I can't see you. I can't see you." He was seeing his sister, who became a Wendigo. Can you imagine that? His sister was a Wendigo, and he believed that she was not real. So he was defenseless and harmless. So this is where the stress, the psychiatric symptoms, and the medications led to a breaking point. Stress plus medication equals breaking point. So the trauma of losing Hannah and Beth was intensified by those drugs. And the game shows that Dr. Hill, in his mind, because Dr. Hill was his doctor, but he was replaying his therapeutic sessions in his mind. He was having his own self-therapy session with his psychiatrist. So there could be a sign that he's just not having a flashback, but he's having a complete psychotic breakdown where imagination now blends with reality. And Josh, as we've seen in the game, does not know what is real or not anymore. So in simple terms, Josh's depression was severe, and he was resistant to antidepressant, kept on switching medication, went with the most severe medications, MAOIs, which cause extreme withdrawal effects, paranoia, and hallucinations, and Josh's grief and stress likely triggered and magnified those guys, leading him to see and hear things. The visions of Hannah and Beth, or I should say, only Beth, or one of them was eaten by one of the sisters. I think it was Beth who became a Wendigo. And they were not truly there. They were not. Only the Wendigo was there. And then add to that the devastating trauma, and you have a perfect recipe for a psychotic break. So in his state of distorted thinking, what might have been just a prank for him, it escalated to a delusional and a deeply delusional quest for what Josh sees as justice. He's not necessarily thinking, "I want to torture my friend." He's not a villain like this. Instead, he is consumed by this belief that I need to make them experience this terror, and it's the only way to balance the scales. It's an attempt to finally force them and truly make them understand that the horror he's been living with, they have to live it as well. So for him, he thinks that this is the only path to closure. So under the grip of delusions, hallucinations, his moral judgment of what is right and wrong becomes wrapped. And he genuinely believes that scaring them is not only justifiable but is necessary, because he needs to correct this wrong. He needs to correct it, guys, and he's been carrying this wrong alone for way too long. So when you see Josh in the game replaying his therapy session in his mind, or seeing his sister, he thinks he's seeing his sister. It's not a theatrical flair, guys. It's a sign and proof of a fracturing psyche. And it's a psyche that's been pushed beyond his limits because of an unprocessed trauma and a dangerously unstable medication regimen. And in all this mental fog, his logic warps into something completely different. A conviction that terror is the only tool he has for redemption. This is why Josh's plan, however terrifying it might be, however horrifying, makes sense to him. Because in his reality, driven by psychosis, it's the only course of action that is right. So now, does understanding psychosis excuse the terror he inflicted? It doesn't excuse it. I've never said that. That's not what I'm arguing for. Again, in a purely moral sense, it doesn't. But it fundamentally changes how we view his actions. Psychosis impairs judgment. We know this, we've shown it. It distorts perception, shatters rational thought. In a psychotic state, Josh's decision-making would be profoundly compromised. He may have genuinely, delusionally believed that his horrific game was not just justified, but necessary. His mind was bombarded by hallucinations and paranoia, and they could have convinced him that this is the only way and the only path to justice. The only way to really find a semblance of closure and finally not have those hallucinations anymore. He's not a calculated villain like we see in many of video games and movies. He's just a deeply unwell individual, guys. He was just trapped in a complete psychotic episode, acting out a reality that is broken and not real. And that psychiatric reality changes everything. So now, let's put all those pieces together and address why Josh believed that his revenge was justified and what justifies his actions. The deep betrayal by his closest friends, guys, was a tragedy that began with a prank. And as it was a prank that many people believed that was supposed to be harmless. It was supposed to be funny, and it was by the very people he trusted most. Hannah, Josh's sister, of course, was singled out and humiliated. Can you imagine? She was made fun. We're talking about a woman, guys. A woman who loved Mike. And they made believe that Mike loved her too. So they pranked her. And think about it. Because of this, she fled into the winter storm. Not dressed properly, into the mountain at night with no one outside. And Beth, of course, because it's her sister, desperate to protect, followed along, and none of them came back. None of them. And they don't know why. And no legal consequences were followed. There were no arrests. No one was blamed. And in Josh's mind, everything was brushed aside. But we've talked enough about the psychology, guys. Enough of this. Let's look at the raw heart of this tragedy and betrayal, not by strangers, but by his best friends. Think about it. I want you to really think this through. It's not an unknown force that caused Josh's sisters to die. It was a careless prank of the very people he laughed, and bonded with. So, knowing this, it adds a deeper layer to Josh's mourning, because it's a gut punch realization that, oh shit, they are the ones that should have been my best friends, and they're not there to comfort me, and they also were the cause of this. So there's a profound sense of personal violation, guys, and that ignited a desperate need for them to really understand the depth of their actions and what justice was available to Josh. Can you name me one? Come on, you can't name me one, because there was none. There was no court case, no punishment, and his friends scattered, carried on living their life like nothing happened, and facing no repercussions for what took place on that mountain. For Josh, he was already on the brink, and the absence of accountability just destroyed his wound and made his wound much bigger with no return. There was no justice, just silence and avoidance. So, this was a last-ditch effort by Josh to make them experience finally real remorse. So now let's tie it all together, guys. What is the most convincing point is that Josh's mental collapse, rooted in overwhelming grief and a sense of betrayal, and guys, we really need to keep this in mind. It's a spiraling psychosis led him to see this twisted plan as the only option left. So let's look at the facts. Fact number 1, he lost his sister. He lost his sisters to his best friend. Fact number 2, he lays the blame at the people who are closest to him. And it was a deep betrayal with no justice. Fact number 3, we have factual evidence that Josh was not well mentally, and he had pre-existing mental health struggles, which culminated into the hallucinations we saw in the cave and outside. And guys, combine these facts makes for the perfect storm of a psychological breakdown. And now, guys, the betrayal intensified the grief, compounded by a mental health crisis, no justice, and it just pushes him into a state of distorted reality. And from within, Josh thinks that this horrifying prank becomes his fractured reality of justice. It's tragic, but it's the only possible way he sees for process his heartbreak. And it's human, and it's a cry for help. So, in his way, this is really a way to make sense of the people that failed him and the death of his sisters. And that is the tragedy of Josh. Guys, the tragedy of Josh doesn't end there as well. They left him in a cabin when they know they were full of wendigos. Can you imagine this? A distorted man who needed help, who was already betrayed by his best friends, decide to betray him once more, to potentially lead him to his death by leaving him outside, leaving him when they know there's wendigos. They saw those wendigos for themselves and what they do to other people, and they decided to leave him there. Yes, they decided to go back for him, but that was too late. How many betrayals can you do to a person until it's too much? All the betrayals of his friends led to death. Death of his sisters, to potentially the death of Josh, or to him becoming a Wendigo. So tell me, guys, how is this justifiable and acceptable? You guys are here debating about Josh's actions, but are not there to talk about how his friends led him to die, led him to become a Wendigo, led to the death of his sisters. Why is Josh singled out? So this game is not just about him. The Wendigos are there. His friends are also the evil in the story. So perhaps the true horror of Until Dawn isn't the supernatural threat we see in that mountain or the Wendigos lurking in the shadows. It is the corrosive, failed trauma caused by his best friends. They shattered his trust. They were once inseparable. And he has this heavy burden on his shoulder. And they decide that we will not address this. We will just continue our lives like nothing happened. And then, to add fuel to the fire, they decide to lead him to die. So in many ways, Until Dawn is a story, a tragic one, about Josh, who was haunted by the memory of his sisters dying, by a deafening silence of his friends who never owned up to the prank that they did to him and his sisters. So now, I want you to look at his actions through the lens of grief, mental fragility, and betrayal. It becomes clear to me, guys, that Josh was pushed to a point where he genuinely believed that his gruesome prank was the only way to balance the scales. And we see throughout the game that he's not all wrong. How come? How dare they decide to let him die when they killed his own sister? It's easy to label him as a villain, but the deeper horror in this is how much of Josh Payne was avoidable, how his death was avoidable. If those closest to him had at least acknowledged the harm that they caused, he would have never received the true justice that he received, who was his suffering that went unanswered. And to add fueling to the fire, they set him aside and killed him while he suffered of psychosis, and he suffered of a monstrous fate he did not deserve. So maybe, and just maybe, that the real tragedy is no one intervened before Josh was swallowed by his demons. His friends have a duty. They do. You have a duty as a best friend. At least to offer some authentic empathy or accountability or real therapy. Because if they did, Josh could have been alive, and this entire ordeal on this mountain might have acted out differently. Instead, Josh was left shouldering not only the weight of his grief, but the betrayal and the guilt of his best friend that walked away. His end of becoming a Wendigo or dying is unacceptable and is less of a reckoning and more of a final atonement and a devastating casualty that should have never happened. So if Until Dawn is about to teach us anything, and if this video taught you anything, is that the denial and the dismissal can be far more destructive than any supernatural terror in that mountain. And in the end, Josh might just deserve our understanding more than our condemnation.